Okay, well, thank you very much for staying in this great theatre that we are, where we are this morning. Okay, right, let's start right away. My name's Rebecca Place, and I work in the British Council in Bilbao. And something that I do a lot of, most of my time in the last few years has been doing teacher training, and a lot of that is working with teachers who are thinking about using CLIL or in the process of using CLIL, or have been teaching CLIL classes for the last 10 years. So a big variety of teaching situations where I am brought in to help, to inspire, to give ideas, to suggest remedies for things that don't seem to be going so well. Anyway, but I thought I'd better start off by asking you what CLIL stands for. So, anybody, would you like to volunteer? What do the my clicker's gone off. What do the initials CLIL stand for? Yes?
Content, language, integrated learning.
Thank you very much. Okay. Now, the reason I asked was just in case, because I have actually done talks where people at the end of it said, what was it? Last year I had a 60-hour course with some teachers, very nice, lots of ideas, and at the end they said, thank you so much for that course in CLIC. And I thought, what? Okay, so yes, content and language integrated learning, and that's what we're going to be looking at, but we'll look at some theory, but we'll also see how that can be put into practice. Okay, now it's working. So, we don't only have CLIL and the content, but we're also often talking about the 4 Cs that are part of the theory of CLIL. And these are the 4 Cs that were coined by Do Coyle, who said that not only have we got content, but we've also got, heavens, if I press that, what will happen? Nothing at all. Oops, wrong one. Okay. We've also got communication, cognition, and the contexts, and culture. So we're looking at a variety of different Cs within the C for content for CLIL. And that's what I'm going to be focusing on this morning. Not only theory behind the content, but the other things that are implicit when we're teaching in a CLIL environment. So thinking about the actual thinking processes that go on and how we can harness them and make them work for us in the classroom, thinking about the sorts of language that are necessary in a CLIL environment, whether it's the language because it's a social science class or because we're trying to use that communication in real life and not only chat to our students and get them using the language in a real way, but also learn more vocabulary and learn it in a meaningful way so that they can actually learn the content as well. So what sort of content might we be talking about? Well, it could be anything. I mean, here we've got astronomy, maths, we've got people in the audience here teaching social science, PE, history, geography, all sorts of different things, music, art and craft. I don't know if anybody else teaches anything else? Here in front of me? Okay. So a big variety of subjects, of school subjects, are being brought in under the CLIL umbrella, which implies that the teachers who are teaching it, they may well be English language teachers who are being asked to teach a subject, or the subject teachers being asked to teach in English, both of which raise the stress levels in the classroom before we even have any students sitting in front of us. So it is something which is a challenge for everybody, a challenge for the school. Then also you have the contexts where people say, but I don't have the material. Okay, so another resource problem, a lot of which is solved or helped with the internet, but as we've just seen in Joe Budden's plenary session, that internet access to resources is a minefield in itself. I refer to some of the things that she was talking about, and now actually I'm thinking about it in a different way after the plenary. So what sort of content are we talking about? Well, it could be anything, ethics to maths. Personally, I always think that maths is a frightening thing because, soy de letras, I'm really bad at maths and always have been. And the thought of doing it in a language that I'm not 100% savvy with fills me with fear. But luckily, I don't go to school anymore and I don't have to do maths. So that's okay. And I think that at least in Spain, the directives from the Ministry of Education are do not teach maths in a CLIL class, although I have been in contact with teachers in Navarra, in the Basque Country, who have been asked to do that. So there's, again, the dearth of material and the lack of communication between the people who are telling you to implement CLIL in your classroom and the feeling that you, as the maths teacher in your primary school, in your secondary school, you know what the students need and you know the problems that are involved in that. So what sort of CLIL might we be talking about? Well, CLIL goes on a cline from soft CLIL to hard CLIL. Again, we'll move into some practice in a moment, but thinking about where you are on this cline. Okay, soft CLIL, we've got down here Japanese and English. Now, obviously, I don't know whether any of you teach Japanese in your school. Where I'm working in the Basque Country in Bilbao, most of the schools are Basque, Spanish, English, or Basque and English. So we've got that double. We're already working with a third language. English is the L3, not even just the L2. But moving from soft CLIL to hard CLIL, if we're looking at the objectives there, I feel like a weather lady here. I want to be able to point at things. Obviously, if you think back, if you are an English teacher, my background is as an English teacher, EFL, okay, we did CLIL because we talked about the life and times of Madonna, of Milli Vanilli. I've been doing it for a long time. But then we could move on that same cline and we could go right the way to hard CLIL and we could be talking about music theory or the life and times of Christopher Columbus rather than Madonna. Possibly more interesting, but there you go. That's only my opinion. And how often does CLIL appear in your classroom? Well, this may be something that is not up to you at all. It may be something that the local authorities or the central education authorities in Spain, the local authorities where you work, your head teacher, your AMPA, your parent-teacher association, your colleagues, somebody else may well be deciding how much CLIL appears in your classroom, how much of this bilingual teaching you're asked to do. Maybe it's something that you feel that you can offer and you're doing with your students, possibly to a greater degree, because you're encouraging them to bring in their knowledge of English and their knowledge of things outside the class program and the class curriculum. And I think that is the most enriching part of a CLIL situation, where you can encourage your students to actually feel that they're part of it. They make the language learning process and the content learning process their own. It becomes much more real for them. So maybe it's part of a class, maybe it's the whole class, maybe it's Japanese, Basque, Spanish and English, or wholly English. So there are all sorts of different CLIL scenarios, if you like. And if we think about the 4 C's that we had, one of those was communication. Now, obviously, that may well be in a very structured content view of communication. What are we communicating? Well, we're learning the terminology so that we can talk about the water cycle. Hands up if you've done the water cycle in English. Oh, yes. Everybody always says the water cycle. Well, because it's something that it's quite visual. It's a theme that they started thinking about it in infant school, and it comes up again and again and again. Okay, so it's a familiar kind of topic, and we can bring in English into this more familiar situation, this more familiar topic, and we can learn words which will help us to talk about, to discuss, to do projects on and presentations on the water cycle. But they know the basics of it already. So the communication is helped by the fact that it's not a new subject in this case. I think you might agree. Also, if we're thinking about from a Spanish language learner point of view, if you look at precipitation, it's not that far away from the Spanish version of it. Okay, if you look at, I can't read it from here. Infiltration is another one. Okay, so a lot of these. Okay, we're going to do some science, and a lot of the science words are going to help us. So even though we're looking at it in English, we've got the basic. We had that basic knowledge from outside this classroom in this school year, and we've also got the help of the language that is around it in the more content-based language. But obviously, CLIL is not only looking at the language of precipitation, infiltration, and all those other words, transpiration with Asians that happen in the water cycle. It also moves outside the information that we're learning in the textbook. And, all right, so now we're looking at, I want to make sure that my students are not only learning, but they're learning in a safe environment, they're learning well, they've got learning to learn strategies, they've got strategies to be safe within the science classroom. So why not use that opportunity? We're going to do science in English. Let's also put up some notices where I'm communicating, but here I'm communicating on a personal basis, because I want to make sure that they do tie back their hair, that they're not running around, that they're not eating the chemicals, etc. So something like that, okay, it's not rocket science, something like that in your classroom is giving the information, has a role for communication, but it's not talking about transpiration and all those other Asians that we had on the water cycle. So that idea of communication moving away from the purely academic to other things, cell phone on silent, or cue here. Okay, so again, the typical sorts of signs that you most probably have all over your school, because some nice publishers have given you signs that say teacher's room or library, or do you have those in your schools? Yes. Where you're using English. English is up, it's around, it's visible, but it's not the language of the science classroom, the history classroom. Okay, so we're looking at this broadening the need for communication. It may well be tricky. It may well be something that it's difficult because they're not doing the water cycle for the umpteenth time. They're learning something new. And in this learning something new context, we're going to have to be able to not only teach them the new concept, but also using the language, this new language as well. So that's going to be tricky. And we want to communicate with them. We want to bring the outside world into the English classroom and make English more relevant. So we're asking them for safety purposes, for respect purposes, etc., for classroom management purposes, we're using English too. That could be tricky as well. Do we have that real need if we're sitting in school? Well, we can try to make up, to imagine that we do need to use English because this is the English, this is the aim of our CLIL program. So we're thinking about heavens, I can't speak English. We're thinking about two facets of communication, and here is the theory behind it. So we're using BICS and CALP. And I'm sure if you've read anything about CLIL, you'll be familiar with these two terms. We've got the English in the everyday situations, tie back your hair, no running, turn off your phone, the basic interpersonal communication skills, but then we're also looking at this more specific language, possibly more academic language, more specific to the subject and the context. And that would be the CALP, the Cognitive Academic Linguistic Proficiency. It sounds much more difficult. So they've obviously chosen, these two have been well chosen. So what can we do if we're faced with information, new content, new words, new vocabulary? How do we tackle this? How do we begin to tackle something like this? Well, one of the schools that I was working in last year, they were beginning with CLIL in the maths department. I told them I didn't think it was a good idea, but they'd been told that they were doing that. In the music department and in the IT department. The woman from IT had the lowest level of English herself, the teacher, but she said it was actually very easy because everything that was on the screen was already in English. And so her students, who were 14, 15-year-olds, they didn't really notice that they were also doing English. They were just doing an IT class, which they enjoyed. So that was okay. She felt more confident because she felt not only backed up by the presence of resources, but also the positive student appreciation of what they were doing. They were enjoying themselves, and they understood. They comprehended because they knew they had a clear view of what they were looking at, and they were fairly comfortable with it. Whether they were digital natives or not is another question. I put my hand up and then wished I hadn't earlier on. Okay. So she was all right. But the teacher from the music department and the teacher from the maths department had been told that what they should be doing this first year that CLIL was being introduced into their school was to basically teach lists of vocabulary. I thought, wow, that's really exciting, isn't it? I can imagine that working for possibly 5 minutes on the first day, and then I don't think I'd go to that class anymore. They felt the same way, but that was their remit. And so we tried in the course that I was with them for about 60 hours, we tried to think of ways of manipulating that vocabulary in a stimulating way, in an interesting way, in a way which wouldn't be too difficult and overstep the mark as far as the school was concerned, because they had this was step one of the CLIL program, but in a way which would be useful for the students and also something that would be dynamic and push this program along and keep people behind it. So what can you do? Do you present the vocabulary and you say, well, here's the list, let's have a spelling test on Monday and let's translate it into Basque and Spanish in this context, in my context. You can translate it, or I can give you 2 lists or 3 lists. We also had a French teacher in the room, so she was doing it in French, English, Basque, and Spanish, and giving them a whole 4 columns of words. Really thrilling. I don't know. Or do you leave it up to the student to tackle the words? Do you say, okay, here's a bit of real language. Let's think about the context. You have a go. See how much you really need, because I will help you. Or we have the resources. We have dictionaries, those big, heavy books that are useful for keeping doors open, remember? Or we have online dictionaries. You have your telephone, if they're allowed to use it in the school. You see what you can do. Because, again, this is one of the ideas that I believe is very strong behind CLIL, is you see what you can do. You bring in anything that you have from outside, whether it be your L1, L2, in the case of the Basque Country, or whether it be something that you saw on a film, your granny told you about, a book that you read, a place that you visited on holiday with your parents, whatever it might be, bring it in and enrich the whole learning process for all of the class. So let me show you. Oh, it's really fuzzy, isn't it? Okay. Apart from the fact it'll give you a headache, here is a text about therapeutic cloning. We'll come back to it. Okay, so it was a pretty dense text, rather a fuzzy text, about therapeutic cloning. Now, I don't know, do you know anything about therapeutic cloning? What comes to mind when you think of cloning? Sorry? Ah, okay, yes. Oh, that's a frightening book, isn't it? Yeah, okay. Book, film, yes. Yes. Okay, and it was therapeutic, wasn't it? I mean, well, it's for other people, but yes. I will grow you so that we can take out your organs. That's a nice one, okay. Thank you. More... Dolly the sheep, okay, yes. Whose sisters apparently are much healthier than she was, or sisters, or whatever you call the other ones that came from her, yeah? She died of a cold, I think. Poor Dolly, okay. Oh. Any other things that come to mind when you think of cloning? Okay, yes, so you're thinking about the scientific nature behind it, and the spirals and the... Okay. So if it's therapeutic, what does that imply? If something is therapeutic, what does it make you think of?
To improve your health.
Okay, it's good for your health. It'll improve your health. Thank you. So, okay, we're going to look at an article from about therapeutic cloning. This one comes from Crumbs. One online English is a Macmillan thing. Okay, it's not something that I wrote. It's fairly dense, and there's a lot of language in it. What could we do with it? Well, okay, we could, as a good EFL teacher, a good English as a foreign language teacher, I could take out all the words that I predict are going to be tricky, and we could learn them first. Or I could see what they could do. Okay, so here we have this academic text. What can we do with it? Well, we could suggest that this text, which at first sight is going to be tricky for a lot of people because it's so dense, because it's so fuzzy, possibly. It could be a reading activity, which would be a silent activity, an individual activity. Of course, we have our class of mixed ability, so we have the people on the front row who finish in 50 seconds flat, and the people on the back row who aren't even looking at it, and the people in the middle who read about 4 lines and everybody else is talking about it already, so they give up. Okay? We could have the possibility that it's a non-cooperative activity. So how could we make that into something more cooperative, more mixed ability class friendly, something that we can work through lockstep so that we're not all rushing through the activity and some people finish and some people haven't even started. Let's see what we could do with it. Well, with a neighbour and a pencil, okay? You don't have to do this here because you can't draw on the board, all right? With a neighbour and a pencil, I'd like you to draw a line under any word that is a grammar word, a word that you already know, something that you might say is boring but important in that sentence, in that text. So, in pairs, you give them a minute and a half, and they have a look. Oh, okay, I'm not sure why you're asking me to do this, but let me underline some things that are possibly boring but important. So, we're not even thinking about therapeutic cloning yet, but we're having a look at the makeup of the text, because this is the communication part, the other part, the BICS, if you like, of your more content, the content of the text. We've got the scientific notions, we've got the scientific words, but first of all, we're looking at how we're building it up. So this is in which, usually, the. We're looking at articles, at auxiliaries, this kind of thing. Okay. Then you say, if of course they have their lovely pencil cases full of coloured pens, if not, all right, this time a dotted line rather than a straight line. Or if you've got a yellow pen, okay, maybe a wiggly line under anything that you think is Latinate, a word that you think might come from Latin. Okay, well, there are other ones, but here are 3 possible. Obviously, this depends on the maturity, the age, the general knowledge, the way you know your class, because if you've got a class of 10-year-olds doing this, then probably they will get stuck there, okay? But if you've got 14-year-olds, 16-year-olds, okay, think about it. Latinate. Any more? Nucleus. Just sounds Latin, doesn't it? Or, of course, what you could do is say, all right, not latinate, because that's a bit tricky, or that was one, and we got 3 ideas, genetic, therapeutic. Maybe these are Greek, and I'm choosing the wrong thing, okay? You correct me if you like. But the idea, okay, so there's something, a word that comes from elsewhere. Well, what about a word that comes from elsewhere but closer to home? What about saying to them, all right, underline, or put a circle around, anything that looks like a Spanish word? Because if we're thinking about, remember the hard, soft cline of where you are in your school or what happens in your classroom, and at the bottom we had Japanese and English all the way to just English. If you only allow the CLIL classroom to function in English, you're blocking out a whole enormous array of ideas which will help your students to develop and tools which will help them to understand what's going on. So if you say to them, okay, I'm not telling you to speak in Spanish, this might happen here, okay, but I am saying to you, use your knowledge of other things and bring them into the classroom. And if you do that, whoa, it's easy peasy. Look at all that stuff that comes from Spanish. Okay, I'm not sure about comes from Spanish or happens in Spanish now. Clonificar, who knows where that came from, first of all? Probably Latin anyway, okay? But procedure. Well, it looks very much like a Spanish word. Cells, nucleus, extracted. If you're a Spanish speaker, if you're bilingual, if you know a bit of Spanish, if you're native, if you're non-native, but you've been here for a long time like me, okay, these are the things that your students will be processing and going, oh, I'm not sure. It looks like a word that I know already. It looks like a Spanish word, but I'm not allowed to use Spanish in class because this is an English class. Use it. If it'll help you, use it. It doesn't mean that me as the teacher is going to stand in front of them and say, and speak to them in Spanish, okay, everybody, let's all speak in Spanish now and look at this. No, but use what you have. And if what you have is a language which will help you, then put it to practice. Okay, so we've got words that, the grammary words, possibly words that have a long history to them, possibly words that are very close to the L1 of the students. What about words that they recognize, but possibly not in this context? Okay, put a box around them. So here we've got some. For example, skin. If you go to H&M, you can buy skinny jeans. Now, maybe that doesn't help you in this context, but, all right, it's a word that rings a bell. It's a word that I know, but in a different context. Well, here we're enriching our students' basic vocabulary bag, their inner baggage of vocabulary by saying, okay, you know that in this context, skin, skinny, but here it's the real skin. We've got egg. Well, isn't that the most important ingredient in a tortilla? So in a Spanish omelette, we know these kind of things. We've got ball. Ha! Ronaldo, football. Yes, wonderful. Match. More Ronaldo, more football. Okay, yes, but you've recognized a word. Ball, well, you've been in contact with that word since you started English age 3 in Infantil, but it's something, but match possibly was not a word that, I don't know, how many of your students do you think hear match and think something that you light a fire with? Maybe not, no? Silence. Match for a football match, do you think that's a context they... Yes. Here, obviously, it's not a football match, and that doesn't help us, but it does imply there's a bit more, okay, I do have a bit more ownership of the language. I do understand it, maybe not in this context, but it is a word that I'm familiar with. And that's something that you want to encourage your students to do, to feel more familiar with the language, and then they can do more things with it. And then we've got treat. Well, do you do Halloween in your school? Trick or treating? I don't know what it means often, and here it's a different version. Here we're using the verb. We're not talking about chocolate when you ring somebody's doorbell, but it's another word that probably, depending on your students, they will recognize it from another context. Again, they have that word. It belongs to them already, and they're now learning that it goes into another context. So we've gone through various different ways of looking at a text, always in pairs, always, okay, it's non-stressful. I'm not saying you have to show me after each one. But then my last comment would be, okay, now take a red pen and underline or circle a word that you don't know and you would like to find out about. So a word that, okay, I've done the bits I feel I'm quite confident with, but this word I really don't know. And I would like to know because I think it's probably important for the context. So that might be STEM, it might be disease. If we've been doing biology in a CLIL classroom, then we may well know the word STEM because we've drawn a picture of a flower. But it's not really going to help us here. It would be a blue box one rather than stem cell. So you've asked your students to go through a text, a pretty heavy-looking text, and in the end, oops, it looks like that, which is a mess. But it's a mess because they have made the text their own. They have gone through it. Okay, you obviously would not do this with every single text, but occasionally, as a boost for their confidence, it is something that they feel now the text is understandable, comprehensible to them, and I think it's psychologically more rewarding to do this every so often and think, okay, well, actually, from all of that, now I can go back and I can read it because I feel much calmer, I feel much more in control of this text, that we could have done it a different way where the teacher gave me a list of words, some of which I probably felt I probably could know already, but I wasn't given that opportunity. And this way, you're pushing the workload back onto the students and saying, you tell me what you know. And okay, maybe not everybody circled and underlined and boxed the same things, but I've given you the opportunity to do it. And maybe this time you didn't do very much. You circled a lot of things in red, or it was just more or less empty. But possibly the next time we do this, 6 weeks down the line, you'll do it, and it'll end up something like this mess. Okay. So if this is a mess, but something that is psychologically rewarding, let's think about one of the other C's, which was cognition, and thinking about how the brain works and how the thinking skills take such an important role in CLIL. Okay, so we've got things. It's quite interesting to look at the fact that language and maths and science are on the same side of the brain. So hey, that gives us a good reason to bring them into the CLIL classroom, to do them all at the same time, if we're using the same sorts of brain power at the same time. So why not? Of course, we could look at the theory, and we could look at Cummings' quadrant and say, well, you know, what sort of material, what sort of resources, what sort of input is good in a CLIL class? Is it something which is context embedded or context reduced? So with a lot of context, with a lot of help, with visuals, with background, with talking about it, with eliciting, with posters, with the book, with looking out of the window, with realia, whatever it may be, or something that is a text, and that's it. Something which is, on the left, Cognitively undemanding, okay, it's easy. Sometimes we need easy things to lead us into something which is more difficult. And C is usually the box, which is the perfect description of what a good CLIL activity will be. Something which has a lot of context, you've given a lot of support, and it's going to be quite difficult. It's something that they're going to have to spend some time thinking about. So you could say to your students, all right, this is your homework. I'd like you to prepare a little talk or write a paragraph on the differences between left and right. We've seen the picture. Okay, we've seen the picture, so that's something that has given us a bit of context. Maybe we've talked about it. We've talked about people in the class who are better, feel they're better at something than others, feel they're more left brain or right brain, left-handed, right-handed. Okay, go off, have a look for it. Which could be demanding as well. Of course, what they could do is simply, oh, no. Do your students use Wikipedia? Now, of course, we did know before we listened to Joe, but now we know even more that Wikipedia is not reliable, that it's something that your students just go into, cut and paste. They don't understand the consequences of plagiarism. You can't just copy somebody's thing, especially if it's not particularly reliable. But they do. So why not do something like this? This is a colleague in TESOL, a teacher who works in Cadiz, Chris Rowland. He suggested this, where you actually, okay, you know your students are going to go to Wikipedia because that's where they always go. So give them the photocopy of the page from Wikipedia. Okay, we're going to do this digitally, but we're going to do it on a piece of paper. So that means that you're actually going to have to skim, scan, sift for information, have a look at it here, underline it, put circles around it, choose the information that you want, and then you're going to have to copy it. So you can't just cut and paste vast amounts of it and not really take any notice of what it really means. You could use the Wikipedia Spanish page, for example, their L1 page, and say, okay, well, you've got this information. Now, make sure that you understand it. Did you understand what it was? I'm not asking you to go to the Spanish page and translate it. I'm asking you to use it, to use the tool, not to abuse the tool. And this idea of using things to make life easier in a CLIL class, you could say, okay, well, this is what, oh, okay, so making the text your own, very important. Good language user, good language learner, learns how to paraphrase. That's what they're going to be doing if actually they don't have it on the screen in front of them and they can just take it all and put it into their PowerPoint or their homework essay, but they have to think about it and put it into their own words. And that really is a mark of, have you understood? Well, if you can show us, if you can explain in a different way, you're on the right track. Okay, like we did with the difficult text, what are the key words? And maybe do that as well, okay, looking at the Spanish version. So, we had Bloom, another bit of lovely theory, thinking about the different sorts of thinking skills which come into CLIL, whether they're the lower order thinking skills, which might produce questions in the classroom like, how many, what is the biggest, or a train leaves Edinburgh at 17:23, and another train, applying what you've learned. Or we could be talking about higher order thinking skills, where you're asking your students to analyze and to apply, to evaluate and to create, to be more creative. So let's see how creative you are now. Okay, we have a pair of socks, which is possibly the least inspiring thing I could think of. They were. Okay, and we're going to scamper with these socks. Are you familiar with scampering? Okay, so scampering means we're going to try and substitute, combine, adapt, modify, put to another use, eliminate, and reverse. So here you're asking your students to take a concept, an idea, something that comes up in our history class, in our PE class, in our social science class, whatever it may be, and to think about it in a different way, to go back to the top of Bloom's pyramid and to be more creative about it. So let's start with the first one. Any suggestions? Off the top of your head, substituting a pair of socks. What could we substitute them for? Any ideas? Well, let me give you a suggestion. Why not substitute a pair of nice, thick, woolly socks for some American tan tights? Is that nice? Some wrinkly tights as well. Apparently, it's a Marmite question. Are you familiar with this? You know, Marmite, that nasty stuff that people eat. Nasty because you either love it or you hate it. I hate it, okay? It's a Marmite question. American tan tights, yes or no? I think I'll go back to the socks, okay? Anyway, she was a pin-up girl of the 1970s in England, if you're wondering. That's where Brexit made her good. Anyway, never mind. Don't talk about politics. So we've substituted the socks. What about combining socks? Any suggestions? What could we combine socks with? Shoes, okay. And there are many, the things you learn when you're when you're surfing Google Images for things. Lots of pages about man about town, how to be trendy and how to be cool and how to wear the right kind, combine the right kind of sock with the right kind of shoe for the right kind of man about town impression that you're making on your friends and your business colleagues. So yes, very, very important for the fashion-conscious male. How about adapting? Any suggestions for adapting a pair of socks? Why not? As a woolly hat, okay. I had adapting for a dog. There we are. It's got braces as well. Very important. Why not? Think outside the box, okay. What about modifying? How can you modify a pair of socks? Well, you could have some peep-toed, open-topped socks. About that? Nice. It's a bit uncomfortable, but there you go. So they're toe socks, but they've had the toes taken off them. Why not? It's all about being creative. Then we could put them to another use. Well, we've had a hat, but what else could we use a sock for? Any suggestions? A puppet. Are you infants teachers, primary teachers? Very good. Yes, or of course the age-old under the bed full of your savings. Okay, why not? Very useful place to keep your money and your credit cards. And the last one was, eliminate. Eliminate. Now, why would we want to eliminate socks? In what context would you say, take away those socks?
Wearing sandals?
You read my mind. Absolutely. No, this is not man about town fashion, okay? This is what you should not do with a pair of socks. We definitely eliminate them, okay? And reversing a pair of socks, well, here was a daft picture that I found that somebody who'd crossed their legs, put them on their feet, but they were playing the piano, I don't know. Anyway, so the idea is that you're suggesting, again, take this idea and do something else with it. Now, maybe socks are not something that come up in your classroom, but language definitely is. And this was the last C, which was culture, okay? And we're thinking about language culture, because as I said before, you don't want to block out other languages that your students might have which might help them to proceed further and to get more out of your CLIL course. So maybe you're thinking, okay, well, let's bring it into the classroom, or at least accept it. You don't necessarily say, okay, now tell me a word which is Spanglish. No. But if Spanglish comes out and it's understandable and it's relevant and it's something that then you can feed in the correct English, well, They've given something to the class. You've elicited something, and they feel that they have actually made their mark on the class. So I think that's a very positive way of looking at it. Not only open your mouth, only put pen to paper, only put finger to keyboard if you are absolutely sure and it's all going to be 100% correct English. No one's going to do anything, are they? So here we've got three labels, if you like, for things which could be labelled translanguaging culture. For example, semantic extension. Well, Joe mentioned googlear, okay? So Google has become a verb, and it's also become a verb in Spanish. Yesterday I came down on the bus from Bilbao and I bought a sandwich that was called ñaming. Okay, I understood, right? Because I was going to eat it, it was going to be delicious, and it became an ing, like footing, like puenting. Okay, so again, these are all things that if the teacher is L1, L2, L3, but familiar with the languages that are going on in the heads of your students, it doesn't matter that they're thinking in a variety of languages. And it doesn't matter to begin with that what they're offering is something which is pseudo-English. Of course, if you get to the calques, like the typical vacunar la carpeta, that's probably not something that you want in your class. You're familiar with that one? It's a very old vacuuming the carpet, but in Spanglish, not a good idea. Or code switching when you're going from one language to the other because you know that the other people in your surroundings understand you. So when you say, haz un copy-paste, then as long as the person who's speaking to you speaks a lot of those two languages, they will understand perfectly. In my house, we often say, pones el kettle, because I want a cup of coffee, I don't like tea, and my husband's in the kitchen, and we have a kettle, because I'm a good Brit, but there isn't really a good way of translating that. So he understands, I understand, and the coffee gets made, which is the most important. So possibly this sharing of cultures, this sharing of languages, you think about translanguaging, you might think of bad Google translations, and here we have secret of pork with dads. Yes, why not? Which often happens when your students are doing their hard work and they're preparing their presentation and they've put it through Google Translate and it's come out in a horrible way. But then you think, okay, but what about sandwich of loin? Which makes me think of Tarzan. But actually, how do you translate lomo in English? I'm never sure. I've been here for a long time. So maybe this is a case where you just say lomo. And the people who've picked up the menu and don't have this translanguaging culture will have to ask and get told, well, it's loin of pork. At which point they'll ask for fish. Okay, so could be this problematic thing. But then you find that because English is appearing more and more, you get it on, for example, a car advert. I have no idea what the car is. It's a Cinco. Is it a Seat Cinco? I'm thinking, and the thinking is C-I-N. It's brilliant. Yes, you're using it in a wonderful way. Here's another advert that appeared in the Madrid Metro saying, dos meses by the face. Why not? Okay, all those things that you find where people are playing with English. Wonderful. It's become part of their culture. It really has. That your students have taken it on board, and then you get songs like, I don't know if you know this one, Picky. You're so picky, 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 picky. And people sing it all summer. I've been hearing kids, adults, people who've listened to it on the radio all the whole time, singing this song and having absolutely no idea what it means. Picky is a wonderful word. You know, don't be so, oh, I don't like that. Oh, no, 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 no. How often do we teach that word? But here it is, it's come into a song. It's a kind of, do you know this song? It's sung half in Spanish, half in English. It's great. Okay, it's something that's come into the common culture and is something which is maybe not understood, but definitely comprehended. Okay, so last idea, get your students to bring in stuff that they're familiar with. Maybe they can teach each other how to longboard. Use a video from YouTube, bring in their longboard, explain, teach. Maybe there's a mixture of languages, but they're bringing in knowledge that they have. And basically that's the idea for a CLIL class. Bring in knowledge, whether it's linguistic knowledge, whether it's actual academic language as well. So, just to finish, I started with 4 C's. We had the content, from the content and language integrated learning. We had communication, we had cognition, and we had culture. But possibly there are actually more than 4. We're thinking about all sorts of different things that come into play in the class. We're trying to encourage them to be curious about learning more and feeling that they could possibly, maybe that has something to do with this and I can bring it in. That's the most important one, possibly, should be the biggest one. Combining not only the English and the science, but also all those other things that they know that they could possibly share and bring together in the classroom. Yes, whether it's socks or the water cycle or whatever it may be. What codes are we thinking about? What sort of language? Where does it come from? And can we use that? Can we harness those different codes to make our students more interested, more curious about the topic that we're teaching and getting them to work together? So I think we've got 1 C in CLIL, we had 4 C's to begin with our theory, and I think when we put it into practice, we've actually got an awful lot more. So thank you very much. I hope you enjoy putting it into practice. Thank you. Thank you very much.